Welcome back, everyone. This is our second video in our mini-series on Dante's Inferno. Please, if you haven't watched the first video yet, make sure you do that because in it I covered details about Dante's back history that you're going to find important in terms of analyzing the first canto that we'll be doing together. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who have caught up on the first video, but it's been a little while since you watched it, this is just a brief recap of what we discovered. So we talked about the Divine Comedy in terms of it being an allegory, an autobiography, and also a love story. So as we get into the first canto, we're going to talk about the Divine Comedy as an allegory in terms of what do we literally understand about Dante the Pilgrim's Journey, but what deeper understanding do we get that allegorical layer in terms of Dante the poet's journey. We also talked about the fact that because Dante pulls from his own life to create certain deeper aspects of the Inferno, we're going to find that it, in some senses, is an autobiography. And by extension, he also draws on his love life in terms of his courtly love for Beatrice. So we can also look at the Divine Comedy as a love story for her. Make sure as well that you've downloaded the worksheet for this video, video number 2. You'll find the link in the agenda item posted for this video. It'll take you straight to a Google Drive link that you'll be able to open, go to a folder entitled Videos, and you'll be able to download the lesson worksheet from there. And once again, make sure that you do comment with any questions below. I'll give you guys about 48 hours before I check out your comments, and I'll either comment directly, or if I see that something really needs extra clarification, I'll go ahead and make a video for that as well. We're finally ready then to dive into canto number 1. And one thing I want to discuss just before we begin is that Dante himself treats this first canto not just as part of the Inferno, but as a prologue or an introductory canto to the entirety of the Divine Comedy. And this is something important to note because it brings us back to Dante's focus on the number 3. So if I'm looking at these 34 cantos that are historically attributed to the Inferno, and I take away that first canto because Dante himself treats it as a prologue to the entirety of the Divine Comedy, I'm left then with 33 cantos, which is going to be important in terms of referencing again Dante's obsession with this number 3. And I say obsession not because I want to draw out the fact that we think he's weird or nut job or crazy, no. Again, he focuses on this number 3 because it's representative of the Trinity. That being said, I'm going to give you a brief summary of Canto 1 as a whole, just so as we get reading and we come to these complex terms and phrases and allusions, we don't get lost, we can keep that bigger picture in our minds. So Canto number 1 is going to begin with Dante awakening in these dark woods. He'll have no recollection of how he got there, and every attempt he makes to try to escape on his own is going to fail. That is, until he runs into the poet Virgil, and with his assistance, Dante is going to become part of this journey to go through hell and out again, coming to the next part of the Divine Comedy, Purgatory, and then finally the final part of the Divine Comedy, Paradise, where he's going to reunite with Beatrice and ultimately escape this dark place that he finds himself in at the very beginning of the Divine Comedy. If you have your textbooks with you, then go ahead and open to page 737, and I want to draw your attention to the focus question that's written in red at the top of that page. And this is the question that we're going to be asking ourselves as we begin to read the first part of Canto 1, those first 45 lines. And the question says this: Dante finds himself trapped in a dark forest, the defile. As you read, try to decide what the path, the woods, and the 3 beasts might represent. So even before you begin to listen to my analysis of what these places and characters mean, I'd like you to try to read through it on your own or listen to the next few slides as I'll read them aloud with you and try to determine for yourselves what you think the deeper, more symbolic meaning of these things might be. So the next slides then are going to contain the first 45 lines of the first canto. I'll be reading them aloud. So if you would like to listen along, by all means, keep going through the video. If not, and you'd like to read on your own, you can jump ahead a few minutes. After reading through the text once, I'm going to then jump back and we'll look at the verses together, about 3 tercets per slide, and we'll analyze them more in depth. And I'll also be continuing after that to help you fill in the worksheet that you should have downloaded for this video, worksheet number 2. Midway on our life's journey, I found myself in a dark woods, the right road lost. To tell about those woods is hard, so tangled and rough and savage that thinking of it now, I feel that old fear stirring. Death is hardly more bitter. And yet, to treat the good I found there as well, I'll tell what I saw. Though how I came to enter, I cannot well say. Being so full of sleep, whatever moment it was, I began to blunder off the true path. But when I came to stop below a hill that marked one end of the valley that had pierced my heart with terror, I looked up toward the crest and saw its shoulders already mantled in rays of that bright planet that shows the road to everyone, whatever our journey. Then I could feel the terror begin to ease that churned in my heart's lake all through the night, as one still panting, ashore from dangerous seas, looks back at the deep he has escaped. My thought returned, still fleeing, to regard that grim defile that never left any alive who stayed in it. After I had rested my weary body a while, I started again across the wilderness, my left foot always lower on the hill, and suddenly a leopard, near the place the way grew steep, lithe, spotted, quick of foot. Blocking the path, she stayed before my face, and more than once she made me turn about to go back down. It was early morning still, the fair sun rising with the stars attending it, as when divine love set those beautiful lights into motion at creation's dawn, and the time of day and season combined to fill my heart with hope of that beast with festive skin. But not so much that the next sight wasn't fearful. A lion came at me, his head high as he ran, roaring with hunger so the air appeared to tremble. Then a grim she-wolf, whose leanness seemed to compress all the world's cravings, that had made miserable such multitudes. She put such heaviness into my spirit, I lost hope of the crest. Like someone eager to win, who, tested by loss, surrenders to gloom and weeps, so did that beast make me feel, as harrying toward me at a lope, she forced me back toward where the sun is lost. Let's go ahead then and take a look at our first 3 tercets, and you're going to see throughout all of the videos that I'm doing, I'm highlighting the text that we're covering in particular, the text I'd like you to focus on in red just to draw it more to your attention. So if you're taking notes, maybe you have a separate printout of the text or you're taking notes in your copybook, go ahead and make note of the usage or the wordage that I'm noting down as well. Taking a look at our first tercet, we see that Dante opens with this famous line, midway on our life's journey. And this is interesting, and I want to draw your particular attention to the fact that he uses the word our, meaning that it's not just Dante the pilgrim going on this journey, or even Dante the poet, but he's inviting all of us, the readers, as part of humanity, to go along on this journey with him. And the line then continues, I found myself in a dark woods, the right road lost. And this is interesting because in a sense, Dante is being rather passive in terms of how he comes to find himself in these woods. It's not that he walked here, that he actively appeared here. He simply found himself in this place. So he's really not taking any ownership of how he came to be here. And we're going to find that that becomes interesting later as we see Dante interacting with different sinners in hell and how he also chooses to distance himself in part from the journey that he's taking. And in this line, we also come to that first phrase or object that your focus question is asking you to find that deeper meaning for, these dark woods and this right road that Dante has lost along the way. And he continues, to tell about those woods is hard, so tangled and rough and savage. And I want to draw your attention to these different words because here Dante is describing the woods itself. And he begins by saying that talking about this time in his life is so difficult for him because these woods, in their literal meaning, are tangled. So you can picture trying to get through a bush with vines and branches and leaves tangling and holding you back. These are what these woods are doing for Dante. In a similar sense, they're also very rough. So it's not a smooth transition or a smooth path that Dante is taking. And why we're discussing this is, one, like I said before, Dante is inviting us on this journey with him. So as readers, we shouldn't be passive. We should be actively engaging with Dante as he goes on this journey to find the right road. And additionally, these dark woods are characterized treacherously, meaning it's not something that we should read over passively. We should come to fear these woods as much as Dante does, because not only are we going on this journey with him, but he's describing these woods as something very dark and evil. And this is going to be particularly important when we come to think about that figurative meaning. What do these dark woods really symbolize? And this will help us also in that regard to understand that whatever deeper figurative meaning I come to, it needs to somehow reflect this treacherous or evil nature of the literal meaning that Dante is giving us. And jumping then to the second tercet, Dante also continues describing these woods as a savage place. Savage meaning something that is wild or untamed. He even goes so far as to say that death, this ceasing to exist, even just thinking about that, is only slightly worse than being in the woods that he finds himself in. So again, highlighting the fact for us as readers, we shouldn't think that what Dante is going through is something simple or easy, or that he's over-exaggerating. This is the worst place he, or by extension we, could find ourselves. But then Dante does something interesting with this third verse in that second tercet. He says, "and yet." And this should draw our attention to understand that despite all of the evil and the fear that Dante is experiencing, both outside and within himself, that there's something good to be found in these woods as well. And this is also important because, as you can note here in the box to the right, this is going to become evidence later for why we can understand the Divine Comedy to end on a happy note. Okay? Another thing I want to draw your attention to, make sure you do not breeze over the fact that these dark woods strike fear into Dante. Okay? Then we come to our final tercet on this slide. And he continues by telling us that he really has no idea how he came to be here. And the reasoning that he gives is that he was so full of sleep that he really didn't realize how he came to be here. And he uses this word blunder, that he doesn't understand whatever moment it was he began to blunder or falter off of that right path. And again, this is interesting for something similar to what we discussed at the beginning of the slide, that Dante at times is going to be very passive in terms of how he discusses his journey. So just as he finds himself in these dark woods, he also entirely misses the moment when he found himself in these dark woods in the first place. So certain things to note in this last tercet here is that Dante is introducing for us the entirety of what he's going to discuss, that he's going to recount his journey through these dark woods. Again, giving evidence for why we can classify this very first canto as more of a prologue, right, rather than being part of the Inferno itself. But also, he is admitting here that he's completely unaware of how this has happened to him, that it sneaks up on him, takes him by surprise. Now that I've understood then at least the first three tercets of my canto, I'm going to jump now to that worksheet that I posted for you guys on lesson and take first these dark woods and try to figure out what deeper meaning is being said. Thinking back to our focus question then, one of the main things that should stand out to you in these first group of tercets is the dark woods that Dante is describing. And remember, when we're analyzing this, we're looking first at the literal meaning, meaning Dante as the pilgrim. What is he describing to us? And at first, he describes these woods in really negative diction, right? They're tangled, they're rough, savage, meaning wild or out of control, and they're able to induce such fear in Dante that at the end of the first set of lines then, right, to verse 45, we see that he's paralyzed with fear and unable to move forward. And these are the things that Dante the Pilgrim uses to describe the dark woods that he finds himself in. But additionally, we also need to focus on how Dante gets there in the first place. And Dante admits to us that he appears there without being able to remember how he came to be there. He makes this reasoning that he was so full of sleep that he just simply can't recall how he got there. And we're going to take these two divisions, right? The way that he describes these woods and how he can't recall his means of getting there, to looking at that deeper, more figurative meaning. So when we look at the dark woods from a figurative level, meaning Dante the poet, we need to understand that the way in which Dante describes these woods is also reflective of how he's describing his spiritual state. So remember, not only is he separated from the city of Florence through his exile, the people who are responsible for this are supposedly messengers for God, right? So in the same sense, he also feels separated from God as well. He's in this state of spiritual confusion. And the fact that this happens without his recognition is incredibly important, okay? Dante himself is unclear about how everything went so wrong. One moment he's at the top of life, the top of his game, he's politically very strong, and he's part of this group who he thinks is going to help change Florence. And suddenly it ends in his exiling. In these next three tercets, then, we have a better understanding of why the valley is so terrifying for Dante. And that's primarily because it doesn't just represent these dark woods, right? We understand that it represents his spiritual state. And the fact that he is in a place so dark and spiritually troubling, we can now understand and resonate better with him, why it would fill him with so much terror. But then, ultimately, this is what makes this next point so much of a shift in mood. Dante looks up towards the heavens, and we're going to see that the tercets that follow reveal that he now has a hope that he can look to. So in looking at this first tercet, here are the things I'd like you to focus on as you're taking your notes. One, that Dante's spiritual state is what fills him with fear. So for understanding this allegorical meaning, Dante as the poet, it's not that these woods themselves are literally terrifying. They're terrifying from a figurative level in that they symbolize his spiritual state. And the second is that Dante begins to see a way out of this spiritual mess that he finds himself in only when he looks up. And this is going to be important as we continue to look at the next tercet, and focusing on the word its. So in this first verse of the second tercet, toward the crest, and saw its shoulders already mantled and raised of that bright planet that shows the road to everyone, whatever our journey. Its here is referring to that hill. So again, literally we understand that Dante is at the base of this hill and he's looking up, and this is where he finally begins to feel hope. So we're going to want to ask ourselves this question: what is the deeper meaning going on here? And we get some hints of what that might be by understanding what this bright planet is. So back in Dante's day, and if you're looking at your textbook on page 738, you'll see that you're given a note, footnote number 14 in fact. And it says that the sun, which in Dante's time was believed to be a planet that moved around the earth. So this is the planet that Dante is referring to. And it's interesting here because you're going to notice that he personifies this. So the sun takes on human characteristics and shows this right road to everyone, which we've already discussed, right? Is this road back to God, this right spiritual state. And again, Dante finishes by focusing on the fact that this is our journey. It's not only him who needs to find this right spiritual road, but we as fellow human beings need to as well. So a few things again to remember from this tercet. Dante is using personification here to show the deeper meaning behind what this bright planet represents. And we're going to get to that in a moment when we turn to your worksheet. But also that Dante again draws us into what he is experiencing. Then finally we're going to turn to this last tercet. And this is explaining what begins to change in Dante now that he turned his eyes up and he looks towards the sun, and immediately he begins to feel this terror ease, the terror that's been churning, as he says, in his heart's lake. And again, I want you to reference your textbook. Anytime you see phrases like this that are drawn off to the side in that right-hand column, it's a good idea to take a look, because it's giving us a deeper understanding of what these words would have meant for someone back in Dante's time. And your textbook tells you, back on page 738, footnote number 17, that this detail reflects the medieval belief that the heart was the reservoir for blood. So believing not that blood flowed through the veins, but was actually kept in the heart. And so Dante is really saying that even his blood that's pumping in his heart is filled with terror, but it begins to ease the moment he looks at this hell. We're going to see that he describes what this feeling is like through the use of simile. That's going to carry into the next slide. So before we jump into that use of simile, one thing to take away from this tercet is that the sight of the hill gives him hope. And he's going to describe this hope as something very relieving to him. Turning back then to our worksheet. The first thing that I want to talk about is, what does this right road or the true path really mean? And on a literal level, we understand that it's not found in the dark woods, right? Dante says that once he has entered the woods, he's lost this right road. So we can only assume then that it's going to carry those opposite qualities. So remember back to everything we said the woods represented. The right road then must be something that is not dark, not rough, not treacherous. Looking then to what this might mean for Dante the poet on a figurative level, the right road then would represent this right spiritual state with God. And again, I want to draw your attention to the fact that Dante continues to draw us into this journey as well with the use of our. It's not Dante who needs to find the true path back to God, but all of humanity. The second sort of object or idea that we're looking at here in terms of its literal versus its figurative meaning are the hill and the bright planet. So we understand from our analysis a moment ago that this bright planet that Dante discusses is the sun, that it is literally a source of light. But also he personifies it and says that the sun is capable of guiding us back to this right road. So I need to then look at my figurative meaning and ask myself, well, if the hill is clothed in this bright light that shows me this right road back to a spiritually healthy state, what then do these two things represent? The hill then would represent heaven, right? It's reaching up towards the heaven. Dante needs to turn his head up even to begin to see the crest or the peak of it. So this hill then would represent heaven or God's dwelling place. The sun then, the fact that it clothes this hill in light, that it's capable of having this human quality of being able to lead and to guide people, represents for Dante God. God having this ability to lead man back to righteousness. So we're jumping back to that simile. And remember that Dante has said in the verse prior, as one still panting ashore from dangerous seas, looks back at the deep he has escaped. So Dante is describing his journey just like someone who lost at sea, nearly drowned, and finally they find the shore and they find safety. But then what surprising thing do they do? You look back at what you just escaped, this terror that you have basically gotten yourself out of. But this is interesting because Dante still finds himself in this grim defile. He has not escaped yet. And he even recollects for us that it never leaves any alive who stay in it. So one of the things that we need to understand here is that Dante still cannot shake this fear of the grim defile or the valley. And that it's partly because this defile spells doom for anyone who stays in it. There's this urgent need to escape. And remember, these dark woods for Dante on a more figurative level represent his spiritual state. So essentially, Dante the poet is telling us that staying in a spiritual state of darkness is dangerous, and there's this urgent need to escape. And the first thing that Dante does in preparation for this escape is resting his body. And then you're going to see that he begins to make his ascent to the top of the hill. And he makes this note: my left foot always lower on the hill. And remember, the hill is representative of going up to the heavens. So as he begins to make his journey upward, out of sin and towards heaven, he notes that something is always dragging him down. We're going to talk about what that something might be on a figurative level in a moment. But again, some things to represent or to remember in this tercet is that Dante reminds us that this is not just a spiritual battle, but a physical one as well, that he is human, and that this is going to take a physical toll on him. And this is especially important to remember because the fact of Dante's humanity is going to be repeated throughout the Inferno. And you'll see this primarily when we come to Canto 3. And again, Dante will find that he is incapable of escaping on his own, represented by the fact that this left foot always holds him back from ascending the hill that represents heaven or righteousness. And we're finally introduced then to the first beast. Remember, your focus question asked you to watch out for these guys. And the first one that we're introduced to is the leopard. And the leopard is described as lithe, spotted, or quick of foot. And we're going to talk about why these descriptive words in a moment, what they do in helping us realize what the leopard actually is. So again, we're introduced to that first beast, and immediately the journey is going to become more difficult. And I think it's interesting or important to recognize too that this leopard comes out of nowhere. He says suddenly. And immediately when the leopard appears, the journey becomes more difficult. The way grows steep. So we're going to think about in our next slide, as we turn back to that worksheet, what the leopard might represent. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here is the grim defile. On its literal level, Dante describes it as a source of death, something that no one can escape from. And we understand that Dante, the poet, he's been describing this valley for most of the first canto. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us that this represents a low point spiritually for Dante, but also socially as well, because remember, he writes this entirely from exile. The next thing I want to focus on is this left foot. And literally, it's just described as the foot that is following behind him as he tries to ascend the hill. But note that it's always behind him, meaning in a sense it's what pulls him back down. And on a figurative level, this foot is not just a foot. It represents the fact that as he is ascending the hill, trying to reunite with God, something is always going to hold him back. And this is going to be Dante's sin, or these old trappings that keep him from achieving this right spiritual state. The next thing that we see appear is the leopard. It's described as lithe or agile, someone who's flexible, swift. Spotted, meaning colorful, it's attractive to the eye, and quick of foot, meaning it's very, very fast. And on a figurative level, we need to look at these different qualities and think, what might these represent symbolically? So taking all of these and combining them together, I see that the leopard then represents the sins of incontinence. So in our discussion of the levels of hell, this is going to comprise the levels for sinners who gave in to lust, gluttony, greed, or wrath. And it's interesting to note that the qualities of the leopard in the literal meaning are then translated into the qualities of sin on a figurative level. So just as the leopard is quick of foot, these type of sins come on quickly. Just as the leopard is lithe or agile, at times these sins come upon us imperceptibly. We don't notice that we are being held by them until it's too late sometimes. And then the last thing, the leopard is described as colorful or spotted. And this represents the fact that sins of incontinence tend to be enticing. They're alluring and they draw us in. Now we're going to begin to see the effects that the leopard has on Dante. And again, keeping in mind that it's not just a leopard, but the fact that she also represents these sins of incontinence. And the first thing we note is that she causes Dante to turn around and to go back down. So we see that the leopard is successful in hindering Dante from ascending the hill. But there's also still this glimmer of hope. Dante is not completely in a state of helplessness. He notes the fair sun rising and the stars attending it. So two things to take away. The leopard is successful, yes, but not completely. And we see this hope begin to continue in the second tercet. And Dante's hope comes from the fact of God's creation. The fact that what gives him hope? The reminder that God is in control, that he has created the heavens and the earth. Recollecting our discussion of Genesis is important here. Additionally, there's some evidence to support the fact that Dante is writing this portion of the Inferno during Easter. So when he references this time of day and the season, the fact that it combines to fill him with this hope, right? Just as Easter is representative of this hope for salvation for everyone. Dante, however, is not out of the woods, as we know, because just as he begins to have some sense of hope that he can defeat this beast with a festive skin, meaning the leopard, we come again to a shift in mood, and that comes with this word but not so much that the next sight wasn't fearful, and now we're introduced to this second beast that Dante has to face, and the second beast is a lion. Before we get into discussing what the lion might represent, two things to note here, that just when Dante begins to feel strength, a second beast comes and beats him back. So just as the first beast represents a certain type of sin, we're going to see that the second beast also represents another type of sin. Just a quick reminder, when we talk about the leopard, talking about it as it represents the sins of incontinence. So when Dante the Pilgrim talks about this festive skin, meaning it's appealing to look at, remember that the sins of incontinence tend to be enticing, right? Turning then to our second beast, you have the lion, and in this tercet it's described as running with his head held high, and that it's frightening for Dante. And the lion is going to come to represent the sins of violence. And when we talk about those layers of hell, this is going to be where those who are heretics, meaning they speak against religious doctrine, or they are violent, either to themselves or to others. This is what the lion represents. And we understand, for example, just like we did with the leopard, that these qualities that Dante the Pilgrim attributes to the lion, Dante the poet is attributing to this type of sin. So one, they come on quickly, okay, just like the sins of incontinence, but also that they tend to be unhidden. They're proudly displayed, so it's not something that would bring on shame, right? The lion has its head held high. And then we also talk about the fact that these sins are more intense, right? They're immediately described as frightening. And this is going to become more clear about why Dante is going to view these sins as worse when we get to the next tercet. So Dante now is going to turn back to the lion and begins to describe it in more detail. And he says that it roars so loud with hunger that even the air begins to tremble. So even nature is changed or affected by the lion or by these sins of violence. But then almost immediately, Dante shifts his attention to the grim she-wolf. This is the last beast that he's going to encounter. And he also describes the nature of this she-wolf, the fact that she is so lean, meaning thin, and made so by all of the world's cravings. So everything that people desire is represented in her. So although the lion proves to be worse than the leopard, the she-wolf is going to be far worse. It is going to represent a sin that Dante is going to place at the very depths of these circles of hell. And the impact that the she-wolf has on Dante is also important. Immediately it fills him with this heaviness that he loses hope of even beginning to ascend the hill anymore. So she is able to do what the rest of the beasts are not, and she completely halts Dante in his tracks. Again, Dante turns to use of simile to explain this. So like someone eager to win, who tested by loss, surrenders to gloom and weeps. And we're going to see that, again, Dante gives up his climb, but he uses this simile to help us understand and to really feel with him how hopeless he has become. And this simile is going to continue into the next tercet. And he says, so did that beast make me feel, as harrying toward me or running toward me at a lope, she forced me back to where the sun is lost. So again, reinforcing this idea that Dante completely loses hope of ascending the hill and reaching the sun. And remember, the sun is not just the sun, it represents God. So this she-wolf and the sin that she represents is enough to completely halt Dante from any hope of achieving righteousness. Turning then to what does the she-wolf represent? And quick reminder, when we talk about the lion represents these sins of violence. And the lion then is worse in estimation than the leopard is. But the she-wolf takes the cake in terms of the level of fear that it strikes in Dante. And again, this she-wolf is described as grim or evil, lean. All of the world's cravings are combined to compose her. She's able to steal Dante's hope away and completely forces him back from the hill. And this is important when we understand that the she-wolf represents these final deep sins, the sins of fraud and treachery. And these are going to compose the lowest layers of hell. She's the most fearsome of all of the beasts, right? She's capable of making multitudes miserable, not just Dante, and is of the most devastating of sins, right? These sins alone are capable of halting Dante from his journey. That's going to wrap us up then for our discussion of the first 45 lines of Dante's Inferno, Canto 1. So when we get to the next video, we're going to analyze the remainder of the first canto, where we're going to finally meet Dante's guide, Virgil. And he is going to set the stage for why Dante needs to journey into hell in the first place. So a quick reminder, before you watch video number 3, make sure you go back to the link that I posted on lesson and download the worksheet for video number 3. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below, and I will respond to them. Okay? Thanks, guys, and see you in the next video.